Amifontaine, northern France, May 12, 1940, 8:18 in the morning. Flying Officer Donald Garland walks across wet grass toward a single-engine bomber painted in dark earth and dark green. He is 21 years old. He was born in County Wicklow in Ireland. He has 3 brothers in the Royal Air Force, and all 3 of them will be dead before this war ends. Behind him walk his observer, Sergeant Thomas Gray, and his wireless operator and gunner, leading aircraft man Lawrence Reynolds. Gray is 25. In 5 days, it would have been his birthday. This is his first bombing operation. The aircraft they climb into is a Fairey Battle, serial number P2204. Every man on this airfield knows what that aircraft is. 2 days ago, 13 battles out of 32 were shot out of the sky in a single morning. Yesterday, 8 went out against German columns in Luxembourg, and 1 came back. The air staff has already written the type off as unfit for daylight operations against modern fighters. The crews have their own name for the machine, Luftwaffe fodder. Every crew in number 12 Squadron volunteered for this, every single one. The target is a steel bridge over the Albert Canal at Veldwezelt, near Maastricht, and the order from headquarters says it is to be destroyed at all costs. 5 battles will take off this morning. 1 will come back, and in 29 days the London Gazette will publish 2 names, Garland and Gray. The first Victoria Crosses awarded to the Royal Air Force in the Second World War, not to a Spitfire pilot, not to a Lancaster captain, to the crew of the aircraft the Royal Air Force had already decided was worthless. This is the story of how the most derided bomber in British service produced the first supreme act of gallantry in the air war, and why almost everything you have been told about why it died is wrong. To understand the battle, you have to understand what came before it and how fast the world moved underneath it. In 1932, the Royal Air Force's frontline light bomber was the Hawker Hart, and its successor, the Hawker Hind. These were biplanes, wood, fabric, wire, and 2 open cockpits. The Hind carried 500 pounds of bombs about 430 miles at a maximum speed of 186 miles per hour. It was a machine that would have been recognizable to a pilot from 1918. The problem was not that it was old. The problem was that Britain had no plan for what came next. That year, the Geneva Disarmament Conference was sitting, and there was a serious expectation that heavy bombers might be banned outright by international treaty. So the Air Ministry hedged. It issued specification P2732, calling for a single-engine monoplane day bomber. The requirement in the form usually quoted was simple and demanding. 1,000 pounds of bombs, 1,000 miles, 200 miles per hour. Read that requirement again because it is the key to this entire story. It was written in 1932. It was answered by an aircraft that entered service in 1937 and went to war in 1939. The specification never asked whether the aircraft could survive a fighter, because in 1932 the fighters were biplanes too, and the doctrine of the day held that the bomber would always get through. The reality was that the men issuing that specification were describing a war that would never happen. Fairey Aviation won the contract, beating the Armstrong-Whitworth design in mid-1936. Their chief designer was Marcel Lobel, a Belgian who had come to Britain and built his reputation on elegant, conventional structures. Lobel gave the Air Ministry exactly what it asked for, and rather more. The prototype was K4303. It first flew on March 10, 1936, with Fairey's chief test pilot, Chris Staniland, at the controls. It was Fairey's first low-wing monoplane. It was Fairey's first all-metal stressed skin aircraft, and it was the first operational aircraft in the world to enter squadron service powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin, beating the Hawker Hurricane into service by several months. At the testing establishment at Martlesham Heath, the silver prototype recorded 257 miles per hour. It was dived to something over 300 miles per hour and behaved impeccably. Assessments noted a pleasant aircraft to handle, though the rudder was heavy at low speed. Against the Hind it replaced, the Battle carried twice the bombs, twice as far, and 70 miles per hour faster. Against the specification, it was a genuine success. The orders were enormous. 155 aircraft were ordered in 1935 before the prototype had even flown. By November 1936, 1,363 were on order. Production ran at Fairey's plants at Hayes and at Heaton Chapel in Stockport and at the Austin Motors Shadow Factory at Longbridge. In total, somewhere between 2,185 and 2,200 were built, depending on how you count the prototypes and the Belgian machines. Now hold that number and hold this one. The first deliveries went to number 6 63 Squadron at Upwood on May 20, 1937. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 had already flown. By 1940, the Bf-109E carried a Daimler-Benz engine of roughly 1,085 horsepower, two 20mm cannon and two machine guns, and could reach about 350 miles per hour. The Battle, fully loaded with 3 crew and 1,000 pounds of bombs, made about 241 miles per hour. That 257 figure was the clean prototype. In service trim, the machine was slower. Its defensive armament in 1939 was one fixed 303-inch Browning machine gun in the starboard wing and one 303-inch Vickers gas-operated gun on a pivot in the rear cockpit. One gun forward, one gun back, against a fighter that was 100 miles per hour faster and carried cannon. The Advanced Air Striking Force was formed on August 24, 1939, from 10 battle squadrons under Air Vice Marshal Patrick Playfair. It flew to airfields around Reims from September 2nd so that its light bombers would be within range of the Ruhr. On paper, this was strategic reach. In practice, Britain had just parked 600 slow aircraft directly under the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. The answer came quickly. On September 30th, 1939, number 150 Squadron sent 5 battles on a photographic reconnaissance sortie. 4 were shot down by Messerschmitts. The 5th came back so badly damaged that it cartwheeled on landing and burned. Squadron leader William MacDonald walked away from that wreck. Most of his men did not walk away from theirs. Within weeks, the battle had been withdrawn from daylight operations for the winter. It is worth pausing on one thing before the slaughter because it is almost never mentioned. 10 days before that disaster, on September 20th, 1939, a battle of number 88 Squadron, flown by Flying Officer Baker with Sergeant Letchford at the rear gun, claimed a Messerschmitt shot down near Aachen. It is widely recorded as the Royal Air Force's first aerial victory of the war. It should be said honestly that Luftwaffe records show no matching loss that day, and the claim is disputed. It should also be said that in the same action, 2 of the 3 battles were shot down. That was the pattern. The battle scored and the battle burned. So what did this aircraft actually contribute? The answer is not in its guns. It is in its engine, and it is the single most underrated fact in the aircraft's history. The Rolls-Royce Merlin in 1936 was not yet the engine that would win the Battle of Britain. It was a promising, troublesome, largely hand-built design that had struggled through its early type tests and had a reputation for cracking cylinder heads. What it needed was volume. It needed thousands of units running in squadron service in the hands of ordinary fitters breaking in ordinary ways so that the faults could be found and fixed. It needed factories, tooling, jigs, and trained labor, and it needed them years before the shooting started. The battle provided all of it, because the battle was ordered in quantities that had no precedent in British peacetime aviation, and because it was ordered before it flew. Rolls-Royce and the Air Ministry had to build the industrial machinery to feed it. Merlin production had to be scaled from a workshop process into a national one. The shadow factory scheme, in which car manufacturers like Austin were converted to aircraft work, was proved on battle airframes at Longbridge before it was ever asked to build anything that mattered. Translate that into what it meant for a man in a cockpit. When the Hurricane and the Spitfire went into mass production, the engine they needed already existed as a mature, debugged, mass-produced article built by workers who had already made thousands of them. The airframe that absorbed all of that early pain, all of the failed cylinder heads, and the retooling and the learning curve was the Fairey Battle. Every Merlin fault found over France in 1940 had already been found over Cambridgeshire in 1938. The aircraft that could not survive the Battle of Britain is a substantial part of the reason the Battle of Britain was won. Not one of the men who flew it ever knew that. If you are finding this interesting, subscribing takes a second and helps the channel. What they knew in May 1940 was that the order had come. At dawn on May 10, 1940, the German army crossed into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The Advanced Air Striking Force was thrown at it immediately. In 2 sorties on that first day, 32 battles were committed. 13 were lost. The survivors were mostly damaged. They had attacked from as low as 250 feet, and the effect on German columns was negligible. On May 11th, 8 battles went after columns in Luxembourg. 7 were destroyed. On the same day, the Belgian Air Force flew its own battles, 9 of them, against the bridges over the Albert Canal. 6 did not come back, and no bridge was destroyed. The Belgian Air Force Association's own assessment of that operation was blunt. A suicide mission, it said, ordered by men who knew almost nothing about aircraft. By the morning of May 12th, the situation was this. German troops had captured 2 bridges over the Albert Canal intact, the concrete bridge at Vroonhoven and the steel bridge at Veldwezelt. Through those bridges, an army was pouring into Belgium. British air forces in France, under Air Marshal Arthur Barrett, issued the order, destroy them. The French Army Group commander, General Billat, put it in one sentence that night. Victory or defeat, he said, hinges on the destruction of those bridges. Number 12 Squadron, based at Amifontaine, was given the task. It had a nickname, the Dirty Dozen. Every crew on the station volunteered. 6 were rostered. 1 aircraft was unserviceable. 5 got airborne at about 8:18. Flying Officer Norman Thomas led the section against Vroonhoven. Flying Officer Donald Garland led the section against Veldwezelt. A Hurricane escort from number 1 Squadron was drawn off by Messerschmitts before the bombers reached the target and never came back to them. The bridges were ringed with light automatic anti-aircraft guns, principally 20mm. Messerschmitts of Jagdgeschwader 27 were overhead. Garland took his section in low. His bombs damaged the western end of the bridge. His aircraft P-2204 was shot down in flames by flak. Garland was killed. Gray was killed. Reynolds was killed. Pilot Officer Ian McIntosh went in behind him and was shot down. His crew were captured. Sergeant Fred Marlin went in behind McIntosh and was shot down. Marlin, Footner, and Perrin were all killed. At Vroonhoven, Thomas crash landed near the target and his crew were taken prisoner. Pilot Officer Tom Davy was hit by flak and then by a Messerschmitt. Believing his port fuel tank was burning, he ordered his crew to jump. Then he flew the wrecked aircraft home alone and crash-landed it in friendly territory. He was given the Distinguished Flying Cross. His gunner, leading aircraft man Gordon Patterson, who spent the rest of the war in captivity, was given the Distinguished Flying Medal. Of 5 aircraft, 1 returned, and it never flew again. Of 15 aircrew, 6 were dead and 7 were prisoners. The bridge was damaged. Within hours, German engineers had thrown pontoon bridges across the canal beside it, and the intelligence that sent those men there was wrong. The decisive German thrust was not at Maastricht at all. It was 90 miles south at Sedan. On June 11, 1940, Garland and Gray were gazetted for the Victoria Cross. The citation records that all the air crews of the squadron volunteered, and that the attack was delivered at low altitude against a vital target. Orders were issued, it says, that this bridge was to be destroyed at all costs. Of Gray, it says that he navigated in such a manner that the whole formation was able successfully to attack the target in spite of subsequent heavy losses. It ends with 6 words: Garland and Gray did not return. Leading aircraft man Lawrence Reynolds, who died in the same cockpit on the same morning, received nothing at all. The reasoning offered was that he had not been in a decision-making position. 86 years later, it is still the ugliest footnote in the story. 2 days after Maastricht, on May 14th, the advanced air striking force was ordered to destroy the Meuse crossings at Sedan. 71 bombers went out. Between 40 and 44 were lost. About 35 of them were battles. That is a loss rate between 56 and 62% in a single operation. It remains the highest proportional loss the Royal Air Force has suffered in any operation of comparable size in its history. Between May 10th and May 16th, 99 battles were lost. Across the 6-week campaign in France, nearly 200 were destroyed. From the 10th to the 14th of May, battles flew 118 sorties and lost 60 of them. The Royal Air Force Museum's own summary of that week records losses frequently in excess of 50% of aircraft sorties per mission. The reputation was fixed forever in 5 days, which brings us to the aircraft the battle is always measured against and to the part of this story that almost nobody follows through to the end. The Bristol Blenheim was everything the battle was not. It was born as the Type 142, a private venture financed by the newspaper baron Lord Rothermere, who challenged British industry to build the fastest commercial aeroplane in Europe. It first flew on April 12, 1935, and it did 307 miles per hour, which was faster than any fighter then in Royal Air Force service. Rothermere gave it to the nation. The Air Ministry ordered a bomber version. The press adored it. It was, on paper, comprehensively superior to the battle. 2 engines instead of 1, a powered dorsal turret instead of a hand-held gun on a pivot, 266 miles per hour at 11,800 feet in the Mark IV, a range of 1,460 miles, a higher ceiling. It was faster, better defended, more survivable, and far more famous. If the argument for the battle's slaughter is that the battle was a bad airplane, then the Blenheim is the control experiment. Here is what happened to the control experiment. On May 14th at Sedan, Blenheims flew inside that same 71 aircraft force and died at the same rate. Blenheims operating that day with heavy fighter cover still lost about a quarter of their number. And on May 17, 1940, number 82 Squadron sent 12 Blenheims against German forces near Gembloux. The expected escort did not arrive. Messerschmitts of Jägerschwader 3 found them. 11 of the 12 were shot down, 22 aircrew were killed, and 3 were taken prisoner. Sergeant Thomas Morrison brought the 12th home, and it was written off after it landed. 11 out of 12. The faster aircraft, the better armed aircraft, the famous one. Nor was this a British disease. On the same day as the Victoria Cross raid, the French Air Force sent 18 Bréguet 693 light bombers, brand new machines on their first operation, against columns in exactly the same sector. German anti-aircraft fire brought down 8 of them. 3 months later, the Germans would learn it themselves when the Junkers 87 Stuka, the terror weapon of 1940, was pulled out of the Battle of Britain because it was being butchered by hurricanes. None of that mattered to the battle's reputation, and none of it should have been allowed to, because the evidence points somewhere the air staff of 1940 did not want to look. The official history notes that the battle was judged obsolete despite the Blenheim, the Junkers 87, and the Bréguet 693 suffering just as heavily when they flew unescorted. 4 different airframes, 3 different air forces, 2 different engine configurations, 1 identical result. The variable was never the airplane. The variable was the doctrine. Unescorted daylight tactical bombing at low level against concentrated automatic flak and modern fighters killed everything sent to do it. The battle simply happened to be the aircraft Britain had most of when the bill came due. The battle was retired from combat faster than any other British bomber of the war. Its last operations were flown on the night of October 15th into October 16th, 1940, against Boulogne and Calais, with number 301 Polish Squadron and numbers 12 and 142. By the end of that year, it was gone from the front line. The last squadron to give it up, number 98 in Iceland, did so in mid-1941, but it did not stop working. Of roughly 2,200 built, around 739 went to Canada, 364 to Australia, about 150 to South Africa. Half of all production went into the Commonwealth training scheme as dual control trainers, gunnery trainers, and target tugs. In East Africa, number 11 Squadron of the South African Air Force flew battles against Italian forces in bombing and reconnaissance work, facing biplanes instead of Messerschmitts, and did the job it was designed for perfectly well. The aircraft that could not survive 1 week over Belgium spent 4 years teaching the men who would fly the Lancasters. Now, the myth. The myth is that the Fairey Battle was a bad design. It was not. It met and exceeded a 1932 specification, doubled its predecessor's payload and range, handled cleanly, and was used for years afterwards as an engine test bed precisely because it flew so well. Nobody puts an experimental engine in an airplane that is difficult to fly. The battle was a good answer to a question the world stopped asking somewhere around 1937. The second myth is that it achieved nothing. It scored the Royal Air Force's first claimed aerial victory of the war. It industrialized the Merlin. It trained a generation, and it won the first air Victoria Crosses of the Second World War. 3 survive intact. 1 at the Royal Air Force Museum in London, restored from a wreck recovered from Iceland, still carrying the rear-facing belly gun that crews improvised in December 1939 because nobody had thought they would need one. 1 in Brussels, 1 in Ottawa, not the fastest, not the most famous, not the one that survived, but the one that carried the Merlin to the factories that saved Britain and carried Donald Garland to a bridge he had been ordered to destroy at all costs, knowing exactly what the odds were, and went anyway.